Okay, it's doing a little thing. You might need to lean to the left and hold your arm up. That might make it there. No. Let's see.
We would have never guessed that.
Okay. Sounds like it's getting clear.
It's getting clearer. Okay. There are a couple of things to try real quick. Let me also hold. Yeah, I was just talking to Chandra as we were connected about how the problem solved all these technology issues. I should have. Here's Chrome is the issue. So, how is that working for y'all? It's better? Good.
Yes.
Okay. We get back on track here. All right, how is that? Still good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yell at me if it changes. All right. So narrative therapy. Again, clients are really the experts in their experiences. So this is where it can get a little tricky for practitioners. That in narrative therapy, we're using the client's language and the client's definitions for things, not the counselor's. So for example, if a client were to come tell you that they have depression or they're feeling depressed, we have a clinical idea in the background of our mind of what that looks like and what depression is supposed to be like. But that's that common knowledge, common understanding, power dynamic that we're trying to move away from in narrative therapy. So instead, it's important and it's part of our job to ask the client, okay, when you say you feel really depressed, like, what does that mean to you? Explain that to me. And really going off of their explanation.
You were doing fine. Whoever talked, they messed it up. They jinxed us. Whoever talked, they get -5. Because it was going fine. It was perfect. It's the probation officer. Yeah, I know. It's Michael. It's Michael's probation officer trying to come in and trying to mess up our system. He's trying to tap in on our session.
I'm just gonna call him
Jill. It's Jill at Macy's. It's Macy's sister.
I'm just gonna call Michael's probation officer so then we can just get back to what we were doing.
Yeah.
I cut the ankle device, so we only have a few minutes.
Okay, perfect. So for this reason, because we're focusing in on the client's language and their experience, narrative therapists really try to avoid diagnosing and pathologizing clients. Again, we're not there to say, oh, you've got depression, here's your treatment plan. Instead, it's much more about listening to the client's story and working through the narrative that they want to work on. We'll talk about that a little later because it ends up being a problem when we have to bill for things. So, what are some of the specialized techniques that narrative counselors actually use? A big one is externalization. So this is where the counselor is encouraging the client to take whatever problem they want to work on or narrative they're focusing on and put the problem outside of the client. So to use another example, a person with bulimia isn't the problem. It's not them. The problem is how society has made this discourse around how people are supposed to look, how they're supposed to eat, and that then gets interpreted by others to mean that they have to binge and purge in order to meet a certain beauty standard. So again, we're moving away from pathologizing people and saying, oh, you've got this problem, to, hey, there's this really not healthy narrative that's happened in our society, and the way that you've interpreted that into your life has caused some real suffering for you. Let's explore some other ways to look at this. Deconstruction is a big technique of narrative therapy. And really what this is where the counselor explores their understanding of the client's story and looks for gaps or looks for details that they might be missing. So these are questions that we would ask, like, what's the most important thing for me to know about what you just told me? Or, this is what I understand of what you just told me. Am I missing anything? Or am I not hearing something right? This gives the client an opportunity to provide some more details, and that opens up a place for that subordinate storyline to come in. Along with deconstruction, we use what are called relative influence questions. These are questions that are meant to get at what might be influencing the client's story and their narrative about themselves. So I might ask a question like, I heard you say that not being able to go to work because of your injury makes you feel useless. Where do you think that comes from? This question will hopefully kind of help the client explore how there might be a dominant discourse in society or in their culture around a person's worth and working. I think something we can explore a little bit more. So a big goal process of narrative therapy is what's called thickening the plot. First tells their story. It's going to be a very narrow view of the world and themselves. So it might be something like, I'm a useless person, I bought the wrong boots, I got injured, and now I can't work. This was a mistake I made. The counselor then uses techniques to thicken the plot. That is still the wrong button. Techniques such as deconstruction, those relative questions, externalization. We're teasing out more detail. We're getting more depth to the story. It kind of ends up being like a soup. You know, the events don't change. So the broth that you start with doesn't change. But the more spices you add, the meat you add, the noodles you add, you create this whole different sort of recipe. And so that's what we're aiming for as we work with the client, is just to get a much more detailed and in-depth story. So a thickened story might be something like, I only had $100 after rent. The electric bill was $50. One pair of the work boots, the really nice ones, is $70, but the cheap ones are $50. I could have bought the nice ones, but then they would have turned off our power. So I decided I was going to pay the power bill, and I bought the cheap boots. I got injured because of those cheap boots, and now I can't work, so money is even tighter than it was before. It makes me feel like a failure because I grew up believing that I need to provide for my family, but now I can't. But if I had bought those nice boots, they would have shut off our power, and I would have also failed my family. So maybe I'm not the failure. Maybe there's something else happening. In narrative therapy, again, we're returning power to the client. So it's the client's choice, and it's their job to decide whether or not they want to change their narrative. Again, our role as a counselor is that we can kind of point out those subordinate stories. We can point out those details that are different, and we can invite them to consider whether or not they want to change their narrative about things. So now that we have more details to the story about the work boots, do you still feel like you're a failure? Or do you feel like you did the best you could given an impossible choice? And it's up to the client whether or not they want to accept that. There are two other really important techniques that go along with narrative therapy. The first is what's called outside witnessing. So for witnessing, the client and the counselor will invite others to witness part of a session. And then afterwards, the client will actually listen in as the witnesses talk about what they witnessed. The witness are picked by the client, again, client control, client power. And the idea is to use those outside witnesses so the client can experience someone else besides the counselor, relaying what they heard and relaying the narrative that they heard. Hopefully this will help the client see how their narrative is being expressed and being understood by others, and if there are places where they want to work on their narrative and how it's expressed. Another huge part of this modality are what are called narrative documents. So these are things that are done between sessions and brought into sessions that help, again, really thicken that plot. So it could be things like writing journal entries, writing letters, documentation, journaling in particular, or letter writing in particular, gives the client a chance to kind of pour out their narrative ahead of time and just get it down on paper. And then when the client and the counselor are actually working together in the session, they can focus more on the process of getting all of that out or refining the narrative. These are also really helpful documents to have during the session to kind of keep the client on track with the narrative they want to share. But again, client is still in control in this process, so if they want to go off on a tangent, they can go off on a tangent. That was a lot of me talking in and out, apparently. So I was very, very fortunate to get to work with Nancy to do a little bit of a role play about narrative therapy. Now, role players are never perfect, but I want you to keep in mind as you watch the parts of narrative therapy that you see. Try to make it very explicit in this video. Were there things that you saw that you thought were helpful and maybe you'd be interested in adapting into your own practice? Are there things that were less helpful that you just didn't care for? You know, regardless of how you might deliver a session, just kind of keep in mind those different techniques getting used. So I'm in a new share to, okay. Switch over to the video. All right, is everybody able to see the new screen? Thumbs up. I can't see everybody's video, so that's less helpful, but okay, perfect.
We got it.
Great. And then I am going to play it. Please let me know if you can hear the sound or not. Nope. Okay. See, good thing I asked rather than letting it go. Okay. Okay. Great. What are you doing? Zoom. I tested this before and it still didn't work right. That's gonna be my day. Okay. Can somebody?
Do you have the video outside of PowerPoint? That usually will help the sound play. Like if you're not in your deck, but you play it from a URL or a file.
Did you optimize, if you optimize your, it says where it says optimize video for Zoom, and it gives you like a little across the top where the little dots are. If you click on the dots and then hit where it says optimize video or optimize video for Zoom or whatever, that'll probably get it.
A narrative therapy session between a client and counselor. In this role play,
That did it, Jill.
hello everyone. In a moment, we're going to take a look at a role play of a narrative therapy session between a client and counselor. In this role play,
I apologize, guys. Apparently, everything that I attempted to make work is not going to happen today.
It was playing fine.
Was
So,
it?
yeah, it was. We
Huh.
could hear it clearly. And it was, you were talking and it was like it was gonna work with us.
Okay, that's not what I saw on my screen, but I'm gonna roll with it then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not now,
Not
but it
now. Okay.
was.
So my screen is completely frozen on that. So that's why I
Yeah.
was like, what is going on?
So before, when you hit those three dots that I think Jeff had spoken with earlier, because we had a similar issue last night, that made it play. So did you do that? Is that what made it play this time?
It's
So what did you do just a second ago to make it play?
well, so that's why I'm not sure, because when I hit the optimize for video clip, it seems to like pop to freeze. Yeah, it's frozen on my end. That's the problem.
It did that to me last night too, Jill. I mean, Aiden, and it literally shut down. Everything shut down, and I had to go back into it.
Well, that.
How did you make
hello
it?
everyone.
See?
Oh, did that work?
It said hi everyone and then it stopped.
Yeah, right. It froze it. Hi, everyone.
Okay, attempt number 365.
In a moment, we're going to take a look at a role play of a narrative therapy session between a client and counselor. In this role play, the client and counselor already have an established relationship. What you haven't seen is the beginning of that relationship and its development. In narrative therapy, it's very important that there is a strong, trusting relationship between the client and counselor which allows space for the client to really share their story and dive down into their narrative, including some of the sensitive topics that can be covered. In this particular scenario, the client is struggling between their gay identity and being in a relationship with another woman, and their religious identity, which very much is tied into their upbringing and their relationship with their parents. Pay attention to some of the particular therapy techniques that are used in this roleplay. For example, you'll see that the client starts the session by bringing in a narrative document, a letter that they wrote between sessions to address their parents. These narrative documents can either be shared with the people they're intended to, but really they're there to give some direction to the narrative that the client shares in a session, almost like to jog their memory, and also just get their ideas out there so they can form a more complete, clear narrative for themselves. The counselor is going to use a couple of different techniques, including externalization, where they move the problem outside of the client and into the external environment. Deconstruction, where they're asking clarifying questions to try to understand the client's narrative a lot better. Relative questioning, so trying to decide where in the client's life and experience they got certain ideas and how they developed their dominant discord about their life. And finally, the counselor is going to invite the client to bring in an outside witness to the next session, which is another technique that's unique to narrative therapy. The counselor will conclude the session by encouraging the client to create another narrative document that will be helpful in their next session. See if you can catch those techniques throughout the video, but I will also add little tags in the video to show you where those techniques are being used. Thank you and enjoy.
Hi, Aiden.
Hi, Nancy. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. How are you doing?
Doing okay. I did what you told me last session, and I wrote a letter to my parents, kind of talking about the situation. It was really tough, but I also feel like it was really helpful to write some of that down about what's going on.
Okay, good. So tell me what that process was like for you. What did that bring up for you?
Well, I wrote about how, you know, I grew up very religious and very much was taught that like being gay was a sin. But then coming out to my parents and trying to get them to meet my girlfriend. Um, and it was really hard to write because I felt really guilty. I felt like I was betraying my family. I felt like I was betraying my faith. And like the more that I wrote about it, like the more I felt that guilt. But I also felt angry because I was like, well, why does it matter? I'm not hurting anybody. You know, nothing bad is happening because I'm dating a woman. So it was tough to write that letter.
Yeah, I can imagine. So what I'm hearing is that growing up, being gay was considered a sin. It was probably something you didn't even talk about really. And now it's different. Now you're feeling differently.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely, growing up in the church, that was the story we were always told, was like being gay was a sin. You were gonna go to hell. And I mean, even, yeah, like you said, even when it was talked about, a lot of times it wasn't. It was just kind of assumed. And so finding myself in this position where I'm gay and that's part of my story is, it's been really tough to kind of bring those two concepts together.
Yeah, the conflict between, you know, what you were taught, what you believed, and now it sounds like if there's a different story, your belief has changed somewhat.
Mhm.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think it's very like different from like my girlfriend's story, because her parents, were really accepting, and so it wasn't a big deal. Like I met them, and they were very welcoming and warm, and but like my parents wouldn't even acknowledge that she exists, and so um, I feel like a villain in my family because I'm causing this strife, or I'm doing this to them, and it's shameful.
So I'm here. So I'm hearing. So you said shame. It's shameful. Tell me more. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that feeling.
Yeah, again, just like feeling like a villain, feeling like my parents are telling me that I'm hurting them, that I'm going against all of the things that I was taught and my morals, and that the church isn't going to accept me, and I haven't talked to my pastor, but that's definitely like the sort of narrative that's part of the faith is, being gay is a sin, and so feeling worthless, feeling like I'm doing something malicious.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What I'm hearing is that feeling that you're having is coming a lot from other people. It's coming from your parents. It's coming from church, things that are external to you.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Because again, I don't feel like it's that big of a problem. Like I'm not hurting anything. Nothing bad has happened because of me being gay. I met this wonderful person, and we adopted a dog together, and have built this relationship. But there's definitely messages I'm getting outside that are like I'm doing something wrong.
Okay. How do you, so in hearing sort of this religion, which sounds like it's important to you, it's part of who you are. And then there's another part of who you are, which is you're gay, and I'm getting from you that there's some kind of a conflict.
Yeah, definitely. The sense that the two can't be coexisting. And that's a lot of what I wrote about is like not like getting all these messages throughout my life of being gay is wrong. And how do I deal with that message that I've always gotten when my experience has been that like nothing bad has happened because of it. Like I haven't hurt anyone other than my parents.
How would you feel about, the two can exist? We have a time in our lives where parents kind of do their job, which is, they raise us, but you've even just said your experience is different. You're feeling differently about who you are and how you express who you are, and religion is a part of it as well. Have you thought about maybe talking with your pastor?
I mean, yeah, that would kind of be a logical next step, is just to see, because he's supposed to be the expert, and I can make assumptions about what he's gonna say, but I don't know for sure.
How would you feel about inviting him to one of our sessions?
I think that could work. I think it would be scary, but maybe hearing what he has to say after he
Mhm.
hears what I have to say,
Mhm.
like could help me figure out where like my faith fits into all of this.
Mhm.
I think that would be, yeah, I think that'd be really helpful actually. Yeah, I'd be willing to give it a try.
Okay. Okay, so it sounds like we've got a plan for our next session. We're going to invite your pastor in to join us. You're okay with that?
Yeah.
Would you like to write another letter just to kind of write down what you want to say to him or what you want to say during that session? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I think that'd be good. That way I don't get sidetracked. I can really focus on like the faith stuff and not
Yep.
necessarily even talk about my parents, just more
Yeah.
my own stuff.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
think
That
that'd be
sounds
good.
good.
Okay.
All right. So we'll see you next time, and we'll keep growing.
Perfect. Thanks, Nancy. I'll see you
You're
next
welcome.
week.
Okay. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, I am actually going to cut it off because sure enough, we've reached the time limit again. So the second half of that particular role play, we got to see Nancy do all the hard work for that part, but was looking at a supervision session where the counselor was meeting with her supervisor to talk through some of the techniques that were being used. So now that I know we are going to get kicked out and it will not be a surprise this time, if it wants to work for me, of course it does not. What I am going to go ahead and have you guys do, this will be the pay attention check, where we will log back into the meeting and then I will keep going from there. So I'll see y'all in just a second.